Time is a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective, hosted by Tim Ullman and Jack Caliber. The ULC envisions a future in which all congregations fully equip the priesthood of all believers through world-class leadership development at the local level. Lead Time taps into biblical wisdom for practical solutions to today's burning issues. Each podcast confronts real-time struggles facing the local church in a post-Christian culture. Step into the action with the ULC at uniteleadership.org. This is Lead Time.
Welcome to Lead Time. Tim Ullman here with Jack Caliber. What a fantastic day to be alive. I don't know when you're taking this in. You may be in the frigid tundra of the upper northeast or northwest, but down here in Arizona, man, life is good. It's like rinse and repeat, 75 every single day. I pray that the joy of the Lord is your strength, and I'm just so pumped to hang out today. Jack, what's giving you joy as we enter into our conversation today?
This beautiful weather that you just mentioned. We're looking at this, just the sunrise is coming up over this brand new gymnasium that's being, that we're going to be doing the ribbon cutting in a few weeks here.
Wow.
And, we're so
pumped.
thankful for all the efforts. I mean, it's been a huge labor of love for people here with their generosity and their time to get this thing done. And I'm just watching the sun reflect off this thing.
Yeah, we're going to play horse. We're going to play pig. Yeah, the sun off of that, man. It's so exciting. Every day is a gift from Jesus. And today I pray you're leaning into the gift of learning with Pastor Stephen Sohns. Pastor Sohns was a pastor at Resurrection in Spring, Texas, for 33 years, a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod pastor right outside of Houston. I got to hang out with Steve a little bit when I was at the National Youth Gathering a couple years ago. He recently retired. We're going to talk about refiring, not retiring, and how that transition took place. So grateful. So, yeah, Steve, how you doing today, man? Thanks for hanging with us on Lead Time.
I'm doing great. Actually, it's kind of nice here. We rarely get cold. We've been running air conditioning, but it's actually down to 33 today. We kind of like that. So
yeah, sure. It's a nice change up. Your summers can be pretty hellacious, kind of like ours too.
Yeah, brutal.
Pretty brutal. All right. So let's opening question to get us going, man. What is Jesus doing in your world that's just kind of taking your breath away? What's he up to?
Oh, that's a great question. Having just refired and into something new, what I'm noticing is just how God is really streaming everything from my past into today. And so you take the experience of being in Houston for 33 years, involved with PLI, coaching, teaching, mentoring, involved with church planting, having a dad who at 90 years old still is excited about the mission, so much so that he wrote The Great Sending. And I have to make sure people know how they can get that later. And also, right now we're working on a follow-up of 52 Bible studies from Genesis to Revelation about God's sending impetus for mission. And so when I see all of that together and my ability to work with churches because of my capital of relationships, every day is just a great day to get up and say, God, what you have in front of me. So it's just a fun time of life.
What was it like being raised? Because your dad's name's Will, right?
Correct.
And Will Sohns, shout out, man. Grateful for you and what you've meant to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod as well down through the years. I think your dad was connected to the rewrite of the Constitution of the Missouri Synod, the new Constitution bylaws, about 20 years ago now. Isn't that right, Steve?
That is correct. He was the chairman of the Blue Ribbon Task Force, all the long letters and words for that. And he's been involved with the Constitutional Committee. He also was on the board for missions and chair for that for years. So for me growing up was mostly about that. We just simply had missionaries from all over the world traipsing through our house. Dad has always been such a super theologian, but his theology and his focus has always been on that is a means, not an ends. And so it's a means for mission. And it's a means for getting the gospel out and training up leaders. And that's what gets me fired up. If I slow down, he gets talking about what we're doing and what he wants to see done, and see the Missouri Synod just burst open with mission. It's exciting. I have to say, though, when I grew up in it, when people would come and ask me after church, so you're going to be a pastor? I was like, no, But what happened, I think, over time as I got engaged in a campus ministry at Wyoming, as God continued to draw my heart towards the white field of the mission, I couldn't say no any longer. So I dropped the accounting and MBA idea and went full force into how can I lead people as a pastor into the mission field.
You're awesome, and that desire. I don't know what other desire, Steve, Jack, I'd love to get your take on this too. I don't know what other desire would compel a young man, or in the various other roles, a young woman, from saying, I'd love to devote my life toward the call of Christ to make him known. I don't know what other desire would be compelling. That's why I do it. Jack, that's why you're connected to this. I just want more people to know and follow Jesus. But sometimes it feels like there could be some other desires at play. Jack, any take on that?
Yeah, I reflect on this type of thought a lot. And I was just kind of curious from Stephen's perspective, like, in your view, do people have misconceptions about mission? Do you see sometimes people maybe not thinking about it the right way that they ought to? Because it seems to me like people need to hear like they have permission to actually be on mission. Like somebody's actually giving them permission to do that because they feel like, oh, this isn't my job. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a great insight. And, as Lutherans, we should be the best at this because our theology on vocation indicates that everything we do, we don't have to be a pastor, DCE, whatever. Our life and vocation opens up opportunities every day to be on the mission from God. And that being the case, what I've seen is more and more people just seeing their vocation as a teacher, student, at the soccer field, at the swimming club, races and all those things. Those are the opportunities for us to be the mission of God in our neighborhood, but not only our neighborhood, but our church's neighborhood, and that the greater neighborhood into the world is there. So, when you asked me earlier about what wakes me up, I think too is just watching people understand that and begin to live it and get excited about it.
Yeah, there's a skepticism in Lutheran circles around emotion, and it can be taken to, so when you say even getting fired up about it, some alarm bells may go off because, well, Lutherans, we're not emotionalists, we're not enthusiasts, but man, I think we should be enthusiastic to make Jesus known, and emotions are a gift of God to be stewarded by the Spirit of God, but we're skeptical of emotions getting out of hand, in the way, if you will. Stephen, anything to say toward that?
Yeah. Well, of course, I'm Wendish, not German, so I can get emotional.
Okay.
There you go. But, the thing is that I think it's a correct thing. We don't want to look at emotion in terms of faith. It's not my emotion that ties me to God or I get excited there. But out of that, as a subset of being in Christ, how can you not be excited about being, first of all, as many people heard the gospel yesterday in worship service, I'm saved. I belong to the Lord. I'm living heaven today to be unveiled forever when he comes back. What's not exciting about that? Jesus' picture of a wedding feast that will have no end. That's exciting. And so I don't think we have to be afraid of emotion when it comes to the response and the consequence of faith, and to realize that God's called us into that. One of the things we use kind of to remind us of our role kind of in our my circles is we have a 10:02 prayer. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we set our alarms to go off every morning at 10:02 because Luke 10:2 says, "Look to the harvest; it's white. Pray, not just pray, but pray earnestly, intentionally, specifically for the Lord to send workers into his harvest field." And to me, that's just exciting when you see that God already has people set aside. I don't think I'm praying to say, where are they? God knows where they are. It's let's discover them and release them. And by the way, I'm one of those workers too. And so the essence of who I am even is not a pastor. It's a husband, a father, a neighbor. I have more opportunities now because our neighbors around us are part of our mission field. And we get pretty stoked about that.
Pastors have to model that, Stephen, for their people. And I don't, it's so easy for my entire life to orient around the doing of ministry with the found. There has to be intention around being in relationship with pre-Christians. So what did you do while you were in the parish to kind of consistently place yourself in spaces where you'd bump into folks who don't know Christ?
Yeah, another good question. You know, I have a good friend, Al Daring, which I'll mention later with the Harvest Partnership. We got together some years ago over several Bible studies, several things. And one of the things was Mike Breen's book and his shapes. And when we looked at the up, which is our relationship to God, our in, our relationship to the found, and our out, we stared at each other and said, I don't know anybody who's not Christian. So we challenged each other that by next week when we come together, we'll figure out a way to get out of the office, get out of our own head, and meet people. And naturally, the next week we came together. We said, how did you do? We said, yeah, I'm still good with God. I'm good with people. I have no idea how to connect with people. So we just kept asking that question. Where are you connecting? Where has God put people in front of you? And we both began coming up with some answers to that. And as that continued to happen, what happened, I just had to open my eyes. They were all around me. I just wasn't being intentional about it. I also had to stop being so involved with the found that I didn't look at the neighbor. For us, it's the neighbors who live next door. It could be a neighbor who's on the bleachers with you, but we were very intentional and continue to be intentional with the people who are around us. And just a silly little thing, every time we go out to eat, almost every time, it's not too noisy, I ask the waiter or waitress, what can we pray for you in? Fascinating results out of that. I mean, the kind of conversations that come out of, you want to pray for me? Mm-hmm. And it's just fun to be able to not come in and say, I'm going to share the gospel with you. I want to find out what your need is and how can I meet that?
I just reflecting on the words of Martin Luther and the notion of faith and what that actually does to us. You know, he's using these words, living, energetic, active, mighty, right? Daring, confidence, assurance that's willing to, he uses the word willing to risk 1,000 deaths. That's like the type of thing that faith should be creating in us, this incredible boldness. And what should it do? It should lead us to be just very eager to share the gospel with people, to just let them know that God is their friend. It's not their enemy. Mm-hmm. He loves them.
Absolutely.
He's doing everything possible to reconcile them to him, right?
Oh, he is. And you know, even our roots as Missouri Synod, if you go back and read C.F.W. Walther's sermons, he constantly calls on Christians to say, why are we here as the LCMS? I think we think about it as we were running away from the European Union and all these things that were going on. But he saw us as being called into mission. And that's why we existed here. We need to have that fervor too. That's
why we stayed, Steve. That's why, I mean, we were going to go back when everything with Martin Steffen fell, but they said, it's messy. Leadership is messy. The church is messy, but we're still the priesthood of all believers, and we're going to make the best of being here. And well, let's start schools. Let's start churches. Let's go on mission to different people groups. That was the heart of the growth in multiple iterations. So shout out to Gospel DNA by your district president, Michael Newman. Wonderful, wonderful history of how we started to grow. And everything rises and falls on Jesus and then leaders, especially in formative years, making bold statements. And C.F.W. Walther, you cannot read him and not see mission jump off every single page, right?
Yes.
And not compromising our Lutheran confessions, not even in the slightest. That's the best way for our Lutheran confessions to come alive. Jack and I were at a inter-congregational kind of ecumenical gathering this past week, and there was a pastor from Denver who was speaking, and we don't agree on everything that this pastor said, but one thing he did say that was shocking, he was a late in life convert, is that I'm surprised that pastors even have to talk about sharing their faith with their members. That seems like something we shouldn't have to do. because Jesus has become all in all to them. The story of salvation by grace through faith, freely given through the work of Christ, is just so compelling that I can't not help but. And that's what we see in the book of Acts, right? You can't stop us. This is in me. It's got to get out. It's got to get out of me. For that sort of evangelical fervor to take place once again in our church body. Anything more to add to that, Jack? I see you leaning in there, baby. Or Stephen, go ahead.
No, I'll let Steve respond to that. I could go on and on and on about this, but I'm more curious to hear.
Yeah. Well, I think we can all go on and on to this, but I think even bending into your previous question that got us into this is that if I'm not talking to people, if I'm not sharing the gospel, if I'm not living an open life to people who don't know Jesus, how do you stand in the pulpit and say, y'all have to go do this? And I think we've seen a problem, not just of Lutheran pastors, but I think, any pastor to say, do as I say, not as I do, versus really modeling and living out the Christian life, the Christian walk, the Christian faith in terms of sharing Jesus Christ.
Amen. Amen. So you're just a real likable guy, Stephen. I really enjoy you. I mean, the joy of Jesus is all over you. The smile of Christ smiles through you. Like, I just love hanging out with you. You're a normal guy. You're a normal guy. I love. That's a great thing. So let's talk about, get behind the curtain with ministry for folks a little bit. So what are generally faulty perceptions of pastors that you'd like just the everyday follower of Jesus who are in our worship spaces to rightly understand?
Well, I think the faulty perception lies on both sides, and it's this, that it's kind of like, and I hated the fact that the Texans lost yesterday. I'm glad the Broncos won. But it's the idea that the church is of all of us sitting in the bleachers watching a few people work themselves to death on the field. And I think we push that perception even in the LCMS, where we install and ordain people. If you read all those questions, it says, what will you do? What will you do? What will you do? And then we look at the congregation and say, will you watch him do this? Will you watch him do this? Will you watch him do this? And then we pretty much say, good luck, we're praying for you, and go on your way. And the perception that the pastor is there to do ministry is a mistake. Mm-hmm. I even think about Luther again. He spent his time teaching and training. His table talks was to build and send more people into the harvest field. And, some of even the reminder, I can't remember well my worship classes, but it seems like there was an idea that the pulpit was always on the north side of the church, no matter where it really was or not. Why? It was a reminder to people that those who needed Jesus were to the north. It was the Huns and the whatever out there. And so the reminder even in worship was, it's not about here, it's now as you are going. And I think the faulty perception is we come, we gather, tell us how we need Jesus, which we do. But to do well, I think, is to take that and say, how now are you going to take that great gift that God has given you of grace by faith, and how are you sent with that gospel? And the faulty perception is we called a pastor to do this for us. Therefore, we've paid missionaries to go out into the world and do this. Instead of, wait a minute, they're here to help us be doing this.
There's so much power in prepositions. Yeah, Jack, you go. But let me make one comment before I give it to you, Jack. What you just said is so huge. It's not for, because we still have a high view of the office of holy ministry, right? This is not discounting the office of holy ministry, but it's with. And that's just the incarnational presence of Christ, right? I mean, he came in and did life with us, called his disciples to come along with him rather than doing it all for them. So that dance and watching prepositions is so huge, from the doer to developer type of move. Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we tend to think of the church as a hospital, right? This is where people go. They're suffering, they're hurting, they need to come to hear the gospel. And it absolutely is that. They come, they get to hear the words of the great physician. They get to have their souls mended, right? But it's not ever only that. It also has to be a training ground, a place for equipping people to go out and share the good news with people. So, yes, care for the souls, equip the saints, right? How well are we actually doing at equipping the saints to share the gospel? How confident does your typical congregant feel they are? Like, do they feel well equipped to actually share the gospel? Do they know how to, like, in a very short and succinct way, share the gospel with their friends and neighbors? Are they able to articulate that? They probably want to, right? But do they feel confident to do that? And are we actually investing in a way that actually equips the congregation to do that? Or do we expect only the pastor to do that? And I think that is the area where we need to, like, rethink the role of the pastor. Yes, the pastor is a caregiver. He also must be an equipper and a sender, right? That's the church when it's operating the healthiest in the community.
How did you seek to do that, Stephen, at the resurrection?
Yeah, well, and as you're talking, we have that great word that nobody else cares about called seelsorger, that aspect of caring for the souls. But the caring for the souls is to move them into a healthy person doesn't go to the hospital, so they try to stay out of the hospital. They go to the hospital so they can get better and go out and live life. So that's what we want to equip people for. I think part of what we've tried to do, and it's not even a system as much as is taking people who are doing it and sharing stories so that people see that and go, oh, I can do that. And in some ways, reminding them that the first part of it is not, I don't think as Lutherans we have to be, I'm going to corner somebody and throw the gospel down their throat. How about being like Jesus, where we listen in, where we find out, where, like a physician, you try to understand what is the issue. So I've always
relationship.
It's relationships. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I always loved telling stories. Years and years ago, we had a 100-plus-year-old lady who was in a nursing home. She went door to door, room to room, got to know people, and she always talked about the old people at that place. Well, she was older than all the old people. But, she just lived life, and people could tie in because everybody knew Miss Judy. I love telling stories about, we have a young man right now who's thinking about being a church planter. Well, it started by him just engaging in some places where he said, I can hang out with a bunch of guys who want to be better husbands. And if they get to know me and I get to know them, somewhere there, they're going to say, why do you do this? And it's not a hard answer, or you find out why. Jesus with the woman at the well, he asked her questions. He found out what was going on in her life. And so for us, it's been walking with people. You have people walk with you. I mentioned the silly story about asking waiters to pray, what we can pray for. So when we go out to eat, it amazes me a little bit. People will say, it changed me radically to see you asking people what prayers they need. And I thought, well, that's really simple. It's not a real significant thing, but the fact that they said, wait a minute, we're not just here to eat. God maybe put us on a track to meet this person today. There's something in my life where I just need to open my eyes to the people around me. And so when you find people getting curious, they're saying, wait, maybe there's more. I think as a leader, what you do, you love everybody in your congregation, but you pour into the people who get it and want to get out and do it.
Yep. That's how culture gets shaped, Stephen, for sure, brother. So let's talk pastoral leadership, just leadership in general. This is a podcast, Unite Leadership Collective. So let's glean some wisdom from you here, brother. What are the top 3 leadership lessons that Jesus taught you over the years?
Well, first thing that really comes to mind, you need to figure out how to ask the right questions before you know the right answers. And I think seminary for pastors is teach us all the answers so we can go out and answer questions that nobody's asking, and that's unfortunate. But if you can ask the right questions, whether it's a coaching situation, mentoring, or for a congregation, I think that's where you can shape culture. So again, going back, if you go back far enough, when I started thinking about my refirement, I kept thinking, when am I going to leave this congregation in terms of their DNA for the next generation? So I started asking the question, if we were gone tomorrow, who would miss us? Who would miss this congregation? If we just ceased existing, who would miss us? And of course, the natural answer came back, well, we would. Okay, great. We would miss us. I'm happy to hear that. But would anybody know about us? Because if you go around your own church and say, where's such and such, where's Resurrection Lutheran Church? You'll be shocked to find out people that are half a block away will go, I have no idea. Because it's not just us, it's just they have blinders on. And so, we started doing that, and I'll tell a little longer story here. We had a flood with Harvey in 2017. Our house got 38 inches of water, the local school did. And what that forced us to do is we asked that question was to look at the businesses nearby who needed help. It meant looking at the school that was flooded and helping them. It meant looking at the assisted living facility next door and continuing to ask people who have gifts for that to go in and help. So with the school, at first we had a pushback from the principal. And then once we kind of got past all that, one day she said, are you just like adopting us? And I said, absolutely. And so she said, what does that mean? I said, that means there is no in my vocabulary. You ask for it, you get it. So we began to send mentors. We began to serve breakfasts and lunches to the teachers. We have a T-shirt that says, we can do more together. That is a piece that every teacher wants, because every Friday they get to wear that for Dress Down Friday, and they walk around in 4 different colors of our shirt, that we can do more together. And so what happened over time is when anything would happen, we didn't have to talk about us. This principal would talk about us. We didn't want that, but she did. And what happened there was this sense of community that not only were we known, but we became a center, because when we went to businesses, they didn't ask us, what do you want out of us? Like churches want discounts. They knew we were going to pay full price and more to get their pizzas to the school. We were going to buy tickets for the Home Depot and not ask them for a discount on lumber. We were going to do things to connect them with each other. And so the cool thing is once you open up the neighborhood and they recognize who you are, it becomes just a great place to be, because now you've asked the right question. If we're missing, and so this principal, because of COVID, she retired. They couldn't have a party for her, so we invited her to our church and the new principal. They told all the families to come online or show up. And when we were done giving her a check and all these things and flowers, she said, "I want to say something." I thought, uh-oh. So we handed her the mic, and she says, all these years, Pastor Steve has asked this question: if resurrection wasn't here, who would miss you? Because she came online. And she said, I want to tell you, at Lem Elementary, we would. That said more to the people of resurrection than I could ever say. But it's the right question. So in my last couple of years, I shifted the question to say not only that, but if you move tomorrow from your neighborhood, who would miss you? So to me, leadership is asking the right questions. Secondly, and this will be shorter than that conversation, but I think pastors, and this is church planters especially, but every pastor needs to exegete better. And I don't mean just the scriptures, but exegete your community. And exegete means to draw out of what is happening. What is the meaning here? What is going on? If you don't know your community, you can't fill the needs of the people who are there. And so I think the third thing, and you could take any order on the importance, but especially as a leader, you have to talk about the vision so much you think people are sick of hearing about it. And so it's partly in questions, but partly is just stating over and over. And again, especially using stories. You want to use stories that talk about this is how the vision is lived out. And this is the examples of where we see it, where it becomes commonplace, and people who even might be a little slow on it go, well, I guess this is what people do here. So we've had people who've left before who've said, I don't really want to be in church that has expectations for me. Well, we didn't tell them you had to do it, but when they're surrounded by people who are doing it, they feel guilty enough to say, I want to be in a church, and I've heard these very words, I want to go be at a church where I can sit in the back and nobody bothers me. God go with you. He loves you too. He loves you too. But as a leader, I want people to at least have to make a decision, not a decision for faith. Don't make me a decision theologian, but make a decision. What kind of church do you want to be a part of?
What would you recommend to a leader? Let's say a leader's listening right now and they say, you know what, I want to grow as a leader. How can I be a better question asker? What would you suggest? How could somebody be better at asking questions?
Well, if you can, find somebody who's really good at it. If you get around people who ask great questions, you'll begin to formulate them in your own mind. This is not a plug, but I will say in PLI, we've taught a lot about things, including asking good questions as a common language within PLI. So if you want to grow as a leader, and a lot of what starts there is Leadership Essentials, is leading from within is really the picture there. So that's a place. So it can be a place, it can be a person, doesn't have to be a pastor. I can tell you at Resurrection, one of the best people at reading a room and asking questions is our early childhood director. She's amazing. If you want to hang out, don't hang around me, go hang out with her. You'll learn how to ask good questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Another little shout out, if you ever want to go through the coaching journey, we've talked a lot about coaching as a practice. If you do any kind of coaching training, that kind of really, really helps you nail down the types of questions that get different sorts of, because it really is a funnel in terms of the art of question asking, not just for interviews, but in helping a person on their journey with Jesus towards self-discovery. From the imagineth, like top of the funnel, what would this be like, all the way down to, and what next steps would you like to take? I think it's fascinating, the various types of churches, going back to what you said about some people leaving. We've had that same thing here. And this is you're a challenging church. I think a lot of times as Lutherans, we wrestle with that because it can feel like law. And so let me ask this, how did you resist the now go do this from shaping Resurrection as a legalistic community? And I know the intent always is you've been freed up now by the gospel to go and love your neighbor. But for some lifelong Lutherans who are used to, law gospel preaching as we're closing every, you're a sinner and now Jesus has saved you, figure it out. But we're not going to give you much in terms of figuring out what that looks like, challenge per se. So yeah, how did you keep that call to active faith from becoming legalistic, Stephen?
I'm sure I did a poor job. No, I think what it is you give people options. It's not a prescriptive, you must go do this. But again, storytelling helps a lot. And what I love now is hearing stories of people talking about how God has opened up opportunities, and watching the faces of people who are just like them. You can see the light go on and go, oh, I can do that. And so I think the shaping, again, is just you lift up the stories that show that what God is doing in people's lives and how they thrust it out there. If all your stories, or for instance, Sunday morning, if all your prayers are praying for Aunt Susie's bunions, and we're praying for, someone's dog who's got, rabies or something, how all those prayer requests come in. Pray missional prayers. Pray for what God is doing. Pray for the neighbor who needs to hear about Jesus. We had
the Lord of the harvest, right?
Pray for the Lord of the harvest, and and so we had two couples over not that long ago, and one of the couples who's just gotten real excited about their neighborhood was just talking about they're going to have a special Norwegian party, and they're going to invite all these people in. And they said to this other couple, hey, why don't you come and join us? And we're just going to hang out with people. Relationships, as Jack said earlier. So I don't have to go, hey, go out and do this. You just encourage, and you cultivate the field where it's happening, and then you invite. Jesus we use law gospel, which is great, but also invitation challenge, I think, is something that's in the Bible. We see Jesus doing that with his disciples, but we don't have to do it legalistically. I think it's done with invitation, the invitation, God loves you, and come and join. Come follow me. I will make you fishers of men. Was that a law statement or a gospel statement? I think it was gospel. So invite
Jack,
people along.
Yeah. Any response, Jack?
No, I love it. I'm bored.
Yeah. So let's move into, we talk a lot. We're going to glean some wisdom on systems. Sometimes we can be a little reluctant to instill solid systems that lead us, our cultures, to be stronger, for people not to slip through the proverbial crack, and systems that can mobilize us for gospel effectiveness and mission. So talk about some of those systems and how did they kind of evolve too over your 30 plus years, especially at Resurrection.
Yeah. And I'm going to put a bit of a twist on it, instead talk about lenses and the lenses that we use to help people see the systems that can be available to them. And we use what we call 5 capitals. Many of you may be familiar with that, but I have even a great little sheet that explains every one of those capitals. But we talk about spiritual capital. What is it in terms of that praying to the Lord of the harvest, and how we can best see the spiritual capital in our own lives. And then when people have questions about that, we can point out the 1002 prayer. We can point out particular groups and, in a sense, determine what is your training need. Relational capital. Very high is, again, relationships. With Harvest Partnership, and I'll just kind of send this over here, we talk about that because we're planting churches, and we use phrases like no planter left behind, high accountability, low control, plant pregnant, which means we don't just plant something so it exists, but so it will multiply. But all those things are really based on relationship, because it's really easy to write a check and send somebody out and say, go do this, and they're dying on the vine. So we want people to be keyed into their relationships with each other. Their relationships in our Harvest Partnership with our planters are so important to us. We will do what this is. Again, it's a yes. If you need me to preach for you, yes. If you want us to take your kids, yes. If we need to come to your house in the middle of the night because of an emergency, yes. It's that you can trust us, and then we want that to become a system where people see that lens, that relationships are the key with the spiritual. Intellectual capital. In terms of the Harvest Partnership, what we do is we come together often, Zoom calls or in person, or in a retreat annually, with people who want to multiply. And so what I find is I've never planted a church. My dad did. I've never planted a church, but I'm the old goat who brings understanding about governance, constitutions. Do you think a church planter cares about a constitution? And so it's not a system as much as it is resources. So the system is to resource people as you look through the lens of the spiritual capital, intellectual capital, relational capital, physical capital. For us, physical capital for the church, which is reaching Telugu people, is having a building to be in. But physical capital for my friend down in Porter is that my time is yours. So you never say I'm sorry when you call me, because that's a capital that you always have. And financial capital is to, that t-shirt I mentioned earlier, we can do more together. For us, a system is partnership. So we want to partner people within the church to grow. So if I meet somebody, I want them to partner with somebody. It's constantly connecting people. And then in churches, resurrection never plants by itself. We always plant with 1 to 3 more churches, because guess what? We can do more together. And the systems happen when each church brings their own strengths into it. And as those strengths come together and we send people together, it just kind of adds. So it's not a system. I know you ask about systems, but I'm thinking more in terms of lenses and how people look at their own life, and then how we look at our church life, and then how we look at our planting life. And so those 5 capitals, if anybody ever wants to write me and say, could you send me more? I'd be thrilled to send you just to the Harvest Partnership website, or things I have that talk about those capitals.
It is an interesting framework to think. As you use the words capital, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, these are the resources that God has given us that we can use. We can think creatively and with discernment to use these to the maximum amount. I mean, every church has some amount of these. Are they actually using them to their fullest, right? Which is a great challenge for them. I was fascinated. You used the term relational capital, right? That's something I think about a lot. When it comes to evangelism, right? Going out, inviting a friend to church, it may or may not work, but many friends will say yes if they come, if invited by a person who's trusted. But if it's a stranger, if you're just a stranger on the corner and you're just saying, come to church, well, no, thank you, right? I don't know you. I don't trust you. Why should I care about your invitation to church? And so a lot of things that the church can do, a lot of the programs that this is how we think about it in our own context, is we're trying to build relational equity with people. We're trying to build that relational capital. So when an invitation to church happens, that's actually a meaningful thing. If you just put an ad out there and a stranger sees an ad, come to church, that's one thing. But if you just worked 8 weeks to help repair a marriage that was going off the tracks in a marriage class, and you just built that relationship with that couple, and then you say, hey, if you don't have a church home, you come check us out. That's a really different ask, a really different type of conversation.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of conversations it seems like you were building in that school, right?
Oh, for sure. It's, again, they call us their church, which is odd in this day where we're supposed to have separation. But when they talk about us, or when things happen, they'll send out Facebook feeds about us. We don't even ask them, and they'll say, hey, by the way. So those relationships kind of break down the barriers for sure. Pastors, I don't know, Tim, if you find this to be the case, but people may not know much about you, but you move in the neighborhood and the word gets around, he's a pastor.
Yeah.
And it creates a wall. And so we've had to break down those walls by just having picnics in our backyard. Our greatest evangelism tool here is our vast array of red wines and inviting people in. Had a Super Bowl party one time where this guy from France, a backdoor neighbor, and his wife, he's agnostic at best, and she's a spiritualist. And they showed up and said, we'll be here for 10 minutes. And then he went back and saw our French wine, and he said, aha. And they left 5 hours later. I mean, it's amazing how friendships, and even before inviting people to church, just invite them in and hang out with them. And pastors need to do that first, because I find our own members go, how do you have a party? And I'm like, that's not hard. Get food, get drink, and invite people. But at least we here in Houston live in isolated neighborhoods. People are isolated behind their fences, their gates, and their doors.
Yep. No, it takes a lot of intention, Stephen, to do that. We've had some neighborhood parties. I'm thinking of one that was quite. So we have Mormons that are around us, LDS. Yep. A Muslim neighbor right next door, which by the time this airs, I will have gone to one of their family members' wedding, which is going to be very, very interesting. But we're trying to develop good relationships with them. And then we've got some kind of disenfranchised Christians. And then right next door to us, to our left, is a family that joined our church. And so when that party took place, it was just people treated us strangely. And then you had to work intentionally to kind of lower yourself because they didn't feel like they could fully be themselves. And so my best evangelical place is the golf course. I've been a golfer my whole life, and so developed relationships with a lot of men, many of them far from the Lord, and we just get into spiritual conversations just about every round. But I don't force it. They swear around me now. There's their full self around me. And so then when stuff happens in their life, a mom dies, I'm their friend, and then I get to be their pastor too. But that takes a lot of intention, and it's not a neat and tidy kind of journey because of a lot of the baggage people have and the mistrust even that many in our culture have of religious leaders, right?
Oh, for sure.
They've got a lot of preconceived notions that are pretty negative. So yeah, thank you for modeling, going on that journey. I'm trying to do it intentionally myself, but it is a tough road from time to time. So let's come down the home stretch here. This is so fun. Steve, could ask you a lot more questions, but you've talked a lot about Harvest Partnership and what the Lord is doing. Harvest Partnership is a model for church planting that I have been yearning for in our district, and I think could be helpful in many districts. Tell us about it and what the Lord's up to.
Yeah. It started without me. We were currently, when the first church was planted, we were supporting 2 church plants in Texas financially. And so they didn't bother calling us at that moment, unfortunately. But after that first planter came in, we had a nice meal at a pizza place, and they said, God's doing great things. Let's do this together. And so it's truly a partnership. We don't have a 501c3. We don't have a checking account. It's just churches saying, we don't care who gets credit. Let's do this together. And we kind of alternated with Christ the King Kingwood and who calls which guy. And so they called Seth Coonsey to go to Porter. We called Mark and Laura Pulliam to come to Lazarus. They called Trey Sansom. We called Paul Corabandi. We'd like to call. We have all the stuff in place. If we can find a church planter who has that DNA, who has that burning desire to start something new, we have 2 places where we have people meeting, people engaging, and we don't have a planter yet. And that's okay, because guess what? We have people engaging. We have people gathering who are doing the gospel work in their neighborhood. We have churches around Houston who are connected to us. And so our direct connections are kind of in this way. We engage all 5 capitals. And so what happens in people that we are most closely in the core, we give them a 3-year runway where we cover their salary and benefits so that they become sustainable. And they are engaged with us full on in those 5 capitals that time. And so far, by the grace of God, they've all become sustainable. Not only that, they are sending money and engaging in planting churches. One of our church plants also has now a Latino pastor who's trying to reach an area that we expect 250,000 Latinos from Central and South America. And that planter is engaging that, as well as one of our plants that we want another planter. So we're seeing a movement, not because we want it, but it just seems like God's creating this movement. And there's a hungering for that because people have heard about us from around the United States. So we had a guy come on from Missouri. We got a guy from Louisiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, Alaska. I don't know if they're planting, but they want to be on our call. And people are just saying, God's doing something. And as long as you're open to supporting us, can we come on board? And so Harvest Partnership is just really an encouraging group of congregations. Anybody can come. Anybody can share. And our planters get together to talk about nuts and bolts a couple times a month. But we're just there to help others. And so it helps to be in a district. Texas district also helps and says, we're not going to plant churches. You do it, but we'll come alongside you. And so Harvest Partnership is just really a conglomeration of churches, I think, doing what Synod was intended to do. And as other churches have seen this happening, we're having them say, hey, we can do this too. So the church that we want to plant in Willis is actually going to be a partnership. When the guy comes, we've already been putting the money aside between ourselves and our granddaughter in terms of a church plant. And they are so excited about this that we can do that together. And so I just get, your first question, I get fired up because just God's bringing opportunities. Would I love to have a church planter there? Sure. But is it more jazzing to see God's people getting together, inviting and saying, we don't have to have a guy with a clergy diploma yet? Sure. Get out there. Let's spread the gospel. Let's do what Jesus wants us to do. And God will bring us the right person at the right time. And that's okay.
Amen. Amen. I can go on. I'm resisting closing this podcast with an LCMS rant of any nature.
We will. Yeah.
Yeah. What is your biggest prayer? Just get 30,000 feet for the LCMS. 1 or 2 consistent prayers for the culture of the LCMS.
One prayer is that God will create the movements he wants to change the Synod from the grassroots up and not from the top down. I think we get worried about elections and who's in place, and I'm tired of watching that go just nowhere. And so let's see more movements. Let's see churches like yourself getting engaged with schools and ways to bring people into being trained. We're doing some things with that as well, and even partnering with you in terms of pathways into ministry. The Great Sending book isn't the book for all people, I realize, but it gives a great way for people to sit down. And so you can go to thegreatsending.org, and there's lots of resources. If you write me at stevenssohns@gmail.com and say, we'd like a box of books, I'll send you 44 books for the shipping cost of $50. They're yours until supplies are gone. If you have an interest in talking, I can't guarantee I'll answer because weird phone numbers you usually ignore. But if you call me, 832-656-5628, if you want to gripe at me or if you want to say, how can you help us? We're here to resource. We've got capitals. We have equity. We have things that God's called us into. And I think in the Missouri Synod, instead of looking at each other sideways, if we can become a help and a resource to one another, that's a great thing. And so my prayer is, grassroots, it's taking what's working and not replicating it, but taking the DNA of how that works where you are, exegeting where you are at, and then using what God has for you to use.
This has been amazing. One and only Steven Sohns, man. You've blessed us, shared so much wisdom and insight. That evangelical fervor is so strong in you. And I'm praying that the fire of love for the lost, that fire for making Jesus known, continues in your life as you help others move from thinking about retirement to refirement. The Lord is using you and your network in such beautiful ways. It's an honor to call you a friend. Jack, great work as always. This is Lead Time, Sharing is Caring. Please like, subscribe, comment wherever it is you take in podcasts. And we promise to have hopefully soul-enriching, joy-filled conversations with a leader like Steven Sohns. Thanks so much, Steven and Jack. Good work.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Lead Time, a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective. The ULC's mission is to collaborate with the local church to discover, develop, and deploy leaders through biblical Lutheran doctrine and innovative methods. To partner with us in this gospel message, subscribe to our channel, then go to theuniteleadership.org to create your free login for exclusive material and resources, and then to explore ways in which you can sponsor an episode. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode.